Welcome to Bible 365. I'm your host, Kathy Carter, and we are reading through the Bible in 365 days. And I'm sharing my thoughts on everything that I'm reading in the Bible. As a non-theology student reader, I am someone who reads through the Bible because I love the Bible. I love learning about Jesus. I love following God. And so I want to know more about him. So that is how I come to you, as just somebody who has read a few times the Bible and someone that wants to continue to read it and kind of like absorb as much from it as possible in order for it to change my life. In doing that, I am using the 1-year chronological Bible reading plan. So I'm reading through it chronologically, historically, from beginning to end, every page. And I'm using this reading plan from oneyearbibleonline.com. You can go online, that website, download their free reading plan, and you can read along with me, or you can purchase one of their books. They offer books as well. So if you don't want to use your own Bible and be in 6 different books and you just want to use their book, that's fantastic. They have it broken up into days. I have no affiliation with them. I just love their plan. I think it is very smartly put together, and it seems to make the most amount of sense. And of course, in saying that, I'm going to say I feel like these are a little out of order in the day that we're at, but for the most part, I think it's pretty fantastic. So, and I've done a couple of different ones. All right, so today we are on day 140, and it is May 19th. And I think, oh yeah, good, I have that on the calendar. I didn't think I had that on the calendar. I thought it was wrong. We are reading Psalms 79 through 82. So we're coming to the end of this section of Psalms. We actually hit another section of Psalms in another, I don't know, maybe month and a half. But right now we are coming to this the end of this section. It has been a big section. We've been in the Psalms for in the neighborhood of 2 weeks. And so if you have stuck with me and you have been patient with the Psalms, I am so grateful for that, because I know that they run, monotonous is probably the wrong word. I know that they get to be a little bit challenging. You feel like maybe they're repetitive and they say things over and over again. But the best way to learn something is by repetition, right? So when you memorize your times tables, when you learn your alphabet, we do these things over and over. When we do the Pledge of Allegiance, right? I do this in school where I am. And so we do this over and over and over again. And so we memorize it, and therefore we know it. So when we break it apart into smaller pieces, right, we've already memorized it. And then we can kind of go into what each of those pieces means. That's the whole point and purpose. These Psalms were sung by people in the tabernacle at that time. So going about what that time was, the book of Psalms in this chunk was written in by the nation of Israel. So the first huge section we read were written by King David. King David was the king over all 12 tribes of Israel. He had brought them all together, and then he'd established the Levites in the house of the Lord, so in the tabernacle, in one area in Jerusalem. That is where everything sort of waited until Solomon was going to build a bigger temple, which we'll see very soon. But and then he elected men to lead the music department, which I feel like sounds so much less than it is. It's not like a school music department. This was how they worshiped the Lord in song. And so those Levites who used to carry the tent from one location to another long before they landed in the nation of Israel, or in the area of Canaan, which is now current day Israel. They used to the tent used to travel, and God used to travel with them. Now it is in a place, and these people have now, them and their descendants after them are all in charge of the musical area in the way in which they worship the Lord. I hope that makes sense. If not, I strongly encourage you to go backwards and to go back to the beginning, even, as a matter of fact, if best case scenario, all the way back to Genesis, so you can build your foundation, and it'll help you understand where we are now. But if you are here, it's a blessing, and I'm super glad that you're here, and I hope this helps you. That being said, if it does help you at all, or if you have kind of gotten up to this point and you're like, oh, this is interesting, I would love if you liked it. I want you to share it, and I want you to subscribe to the channel. And if there's a bell, hit the bell, because that's going to get you a new video every day. I'm back here every day making videos. So all of that, we're going to start in Psalm 79. And again, we are on day 140. So we're like trucking along. We're doing really good. 140 days in. This is a Psalm of Asaph. And so again, remembering the people that I told you were in charge of the music, Asaph was one of them. But big but, I'm going to note that this isn't necessarily Asaph that is writing. And these are always these little tidbits that I like to give you guys. And I know I went over it already if you were with me more than today. These are these little tidbits I like to leave you. It could be Asaph, or it could be the descendants of Asaph, because remember, this all stayed in his family. So even though they say this is a psalm of Asaph, excuse me, it could be one of his descendants, and it would have the same meaning. So it doesn't mean that they're lying or they want you to think that it's Asaph, but it's really not. It's This is how they understood, and this is how they spoke about lines of people, right? Like their lineage. Sometimes they'll say the son of Aaron, but it's not really Aaron. It's Aaron's great 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 grandson, right? So we want to just be aware of those kind of family relations. Okay, so this is a psalm of Asaph. Asaph is singing over the nation of Israel, right? So he's still, the nation of Israel has not broken at any time in the near future. And so he's still singing to the nation of Israel. And the reason I like to say that it might not be, and it probably isn't, Asaph, is because they are in a time of peril, let's say. They're not in a good place. And when David was alive, near the end of David's reign, they were in a good place. So when David kind of had all these people running the tabernacle, they were in a good place. They were unified as a people group, and they had essentially taken over the Philistines. And so they were all, anyone who was in war against them were their servants, and they were doing really well in the kingdom. In this area and in this psalm, we're going to see that that's not true. So it says, "Oh God, the nations, which is everybody on the outside, have invaded your inheritance." And so I just want to note what this word is. The inheritance, for those of you who have ever gotten an inheritance or have given away an inheritance, this is something, a thing like a financially, or a house, or right, like any of these things that's passed on after death. So you would get this after this person died. This, in this case, is God's inheritance. And so the nation of Israel is the thing that God owns, because God bought that nation. So if you were with me back when Moses brought them out of Egypt, God redeemed them, bought them out of that area, and they are now his inheritance, right? So the nation of Israel is God's to do with what he chooses. They're his inheritance. So he's saying the nations have invaded this inheritance. So God, the nations have invaded your people, right? So the people have come in and they've invaded us. They've defiled your holy temple. Again, why I'm going to say this is future tense. It's not happening right now because they're defiling the temple, and they've reduced Jerusalem to rubble. So something bad is happening in this area. Left the dead bodies of your servants as food. So bad stuff is happening. They're in war. They're not doing well in war. Israel is losing the war. Other nations are winning, and they're crying out to God. And then he says, "How long, Lord, will you be angry forever?" So there's a recognition that if Israel is losing a battle, it's because there was something going on with Israel in which they turned from God. And so God was angry with them. And in his anger with them, he let nations overtake them. So I hope that makes sense, because it probably doesn't sound that great if you're not used to, or if you don't understand sort of the nature of God. God said, "If you do this, I will do this. I have this for you, but you need to do these things. You need to follow my decrees. You need to lift up the covenant. You need to continue to do sacrifices and blessings," right? These were things that the nation of Israel was supposed to be doing all the time, right? And they were not supposed to turn to the right or to the left. They weren't supposed to turn anywhere except face at God. And when they do, things aren't going to be great for them here on earth. And so other things are going to happen. So right now, the author is recognizing Israel hasn't followed through on their end of the bargain. I say that in air quotes because God controls every situation. And so God doesn't need us to hold up our end of the bargain, right? But he wants us to. So he makes a covenant essentially with himself, but also with the people. And he says he's going to do certain things, which he does because he's God. He wants us to do those things to stay close to him, right? So what he asks us for is to stay close to him. He's not going to always turn away from us, but there is very likely going to be a punishment on earth. he's patient with us for a really long time until there is. So, but now they're at the point where it just kind of feels like forever. Like they feel like they've been punishment forever. How long, Lord, will you be angry forever? Will your jealousy burn like fire because they've turned to other gods? God is a jealous God. Don't turn away from him. It's like, I think the second commandment, don't turn towards other gods, right? Don't have any idols. And then it says, in verse 8, it says, do not hold against us the sins of past generations. May your mercy come quickly to meet us. So there's also now, here we go, a recognition here that the people group that's living right now, they're actually not the ones that turned away from God. The generation before did, but they're receiving punishment because of what the generation before did them. So they're saying, this wasn't us, Lord. Again, does God have the right to hold that? He does. uh, Harsh, painful, but he's patient for many, many, many generations until he turns his wrath, right? So many generations kind of get a free pass until he turns his wrath, and then there's a punishment on the people. So he says, don't hold the sins against us, help us. And then in verse 10, the kind of the second half, it says, before our eyes make known the nations that you avenge the outpoured blood of your servants. So make this known to everybody around that you avenge us. And then in verse 13 it says, then we, your people, the sheep of your pasture, will praise you forever. From generation to generation we will proclaim your praise. So in Psalm 80, we're going to move on. It says, hear us, shepherd of Israel, you who led Joseph like a flock, you who sit enthroned between the cherubim. So talking about God, shine forth before Ephraim, Benjamin, and Manasseh. Awaken your might, come and save us. So here we go again with wanting to be saved. So their desire, it sadly, there's a lot of crying out to the Lord when there's brokenness. I think it's a lesson to be learned for us. There are some that are just praise and worship, and that's amazing. And as a matter of fact, one of my favorite ones from David was all of that praise and worship, and he was just proclaiming all the goodness of who God is. And I think that's really important to know and remember that. A lot of what we see is when they are so they turn from him, just like if you were with me in Judges, we see this really consistently with humans, which is not what we want. But consistently from humans, what we see is when good is happening, they actually turn from the Lord and they forget that he's done these great things. They turn towards themselves, and then slowly but surely, as they're turning away from God, then either wrath starts to come in, or because they forget, all of this sin starts to pour in, and then it turns bad. And when it's bad, then they start to cry out to the Lord because they're like, we don't want to live like this. This is awful. Why is this happening? And so it's a bad place for them to be. So then they cry out to the Lord. So it seems for me, we see a lot more of, God, can you help me? God, can you help me? Than, God, I'm so thankful that you are who you are. God, you are mighty. God, right? They say it in here, and don't mishear me. The psalmist definitely talks about the mightiness of the Lord, but a lot of it is because they're begging and crying out for him to help the situation in which they're in. So again, this is another one of Asaph, by the way. All right. So they're calling out to him, restore us, O God, make your face shine on us. So again, it's all about remembering. How long, Lord God Almighty, will your anger smolder? So here we go. And then in verse 7, restore us, God Almighty. Verse 8, I like this. This is a little bit of a parable. You transplanted a vine from Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it, and it took root and filled the land. The mountains were covered in its shade, the mighty cedars with its branches. Its branches reached as far as the sea, its shoots as far as the river. So just that section. Uh, I'm hoping that you might notice that the vine is Israel. So he took a vine from Israel. He took a vine from Egypt, right? The people were in Egypt. Again, hoping you were with me, if you were with me in the Exodus. So he took this vine that was his in Egypt and he transplanted it. He pulled it up out of Egypt and he pulled it in and he put it in the land of Canaan, right? So got rid of everything that was around it and then transplanted this vine that was his in the land of Egypt. Cleared the ground, it took root, and once it took root, it created shade, right? It had branches that scattered everywhere, so it became a fruitful and good vine, right? Reached out, good things happened. Then it says, why have you broken down its walls? So here we are again. They're like, God, what did we do? Why are we being punished at this point? So that all who pass by pick its grapes, because vines, grapes, right? So everyone is kind of picking from it, destroying it, ruining it. Boars and insects, everything is ravaging it. Return to us, it says. And then in verse 15, it says, the root your right hand is planted, which, the vine, the root, the son you have raised up for yourself. So again, we're kind of going back and forth with this imagery. The son is them. Israel, in my mind, when I see this, Israel is the son that he's right. God has raised Israel up as God's son, as God's child. Your vine is cut down, it's burned with fire. At your rebuke, so God does this, people perish. Let your hand rest on the man at your right hand. So here we go. Now we're talking about something different. So let your hand rest on the man at your right hand, the Son of Man that you have raised up for yourself. This is something different. So again, eyes on the prize. We're looking at something now that's different. So God is now saying he cuts down the vine of Israel, right? It burns with fire. It's his rebuke that they perish. And then he's going to have this man, the Son of Man, that he's going to raise up for himself. It says, then we will not turn away from you. Revive us and we will call on your name. Restore us, Lord God Almighty. So something's going to happen where there's going to be a man, and that man comes, Israel will not turn away from the Lord. This is something that it looks like is going to happen in the future. Okay, Psalm 81. This is also of Asaph. So again, Asaph or the descendants of Asaph, whichever you choose. This is big worship, and he is calling out to the people to do this. So it says in verse 4, this is a decree for Israel. So he is calling out for Israel to do this. Sing for joy to God. Shout aloud to God. Begin the music. Strike the timbrel. So all of these instruments going. Play the melodious harp. Sound the ram's horn at this festival. This is supposed to be a joyful celebration. How are you worshiping the Lord? I know that I know singing and dancing isn't for everyone, right? Like I totally get that. I know some people are like, I love music, I don't love music. When you're worshiping the Lord, um, I feel like in some ways there's no excuse. Uh, it's you're supposed to be joyful and sacrificing yourself, and right, like this is supposed to be this emotional expression of joy through music. And I'm not saying it as if I'm making it up, because I love music, and I do love music, by the way. The writer is calling for it. This was a part of their worship. This was a part of the tabernacle. They sang, and they were calling all of Israel to sing with them. All of Israel should be lifting and shouting these things to the Lord, playing instruments, right? Like so. And of course, if you didn't play an instrument, then you're singing or you're dancing. There's something joyful about collectively lifting your voices to the Lord. And so he's calling them to all do this. And again, he says it's a decree, it's an ordinance. It's because when God went out against Egypt, he established it as a statute for Joseph. So he's establishing this all the time. Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph of the tribe. And then it says, I heard an unknown voice say, I remove the burden from their shoulders. So someone is saying about Israel, they remove the burden, they set them free. In your distress, you called and I answered. I answered you out of a thundercloud, right? So, and then in verse 10, it says, I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt. Open wide your mouth and I will fill it. So God's just going to do all of these things for you. And then it says, but my people wouldn't listen to me. In verse 13, if my people would only listen to me, if Israel would only follow my ways, how quickly I would subdue their enemies. So these two Psalms that I was telling you before, these two right before this, if you would do this, why is my anger turned against you? Because you abandoned me. You turned away from me and you went your own way. And you have these expectations of God is supposed to be rescuing them, even though they're doing whatever they want, when they promised to the Lord that they were going to do what the Lord said. And so God is like, if you would do this, I would turn those enemies away from you. Those who hate the Lord would cringe before him, and their punishment would last forever. But you would be fed with the finest of wheat, with honey from the rock. I would satisfy you. This is a cry out to the people of the Lord. Them then, you, me now. This is a cry out. If you would listen to the Lord, if you would follow the Lord's ways, the Lord will subdue his enemies. They will turn their hand against your foes. If you will do this, the Lord has promised these things to us. So this is a promise to him that he makes in the Psalms. And then it says, but you would be fed with the finest of wheat. Again, I'm repeating just so we hear it again, with honey from the rock, and that God would satisfy us. And that's what matters. God will satisfy you with God when you follow God. This last Psalm 82, again of Asaph. It says, God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods, which they have in quotation marks. It's lesser. This is not the God of the universe is the one they're talking about. It's the one that presides in the great assembly, but the one in air quotes or in quotation marks. This is all lesser beings, right? And he says, how long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the weak and the needy. So he's crying out to these lesser beings to do these things. And it says in verse 5, the gods know nothing. They understand nothing. They walk about in darkness. I said, you are gods. You are all sons of the Most High. So possibly humans, I don't, the air quotes in gods makes me think that it's not necessarily, because in verse 7 it says you will die like mere mortals. So I'm thinking it's something else, and they will fall like every other ruler. Rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all your nations are your inheritance. Now it could be the idea of gods could be maybe some of the rulers here on earth, or it could be something else that, and possibly the quotations, maybe because they called themselves gods. Like I remember, I think if we go back to Xerxes, which I think I shouldn't say go back, we're going to go way forward to Xerxes, and I know he called himself a god, and I know there were other kings that wanted to be worshipped like God. So there's a possibility that they're saying some of the rulers here on earth act like gods, and so, but they are nothing compared to, and they will die just like mere mortals will, but God will not. And so that's it for today. So if you like this, I want you to hit the like button, share it, subscribe. My door just opened, so you probably heard that. So share, subscribe, and like it, share it, subscribe to the channel. Keep reading, and I'll see you guys.